that for a recent time, actually. So before that, Andrew was the Chief Finance Officer for the NHS. So a pretty large job, and has been doing lots of finance director, chief finance things for lots of charities as well. He has currently now joined the world of consulting, but he does spend half of his time as finance and IT director of the Rotherham Hospice as well. He's got lots of passions. He's passionate about strategic collaboration, which he's going to talk to us about. He's passionate about transformation, especially from a process-led point of view. And he's passionate about embracing change. So there's a lot that we're going to learn from Andrew. Andrew's going to use slides. You can see them up on your deck, his deck already. But he's also going to pause for Q&A as we go along. So as before, Nancy and I will monitor the chat. Put your questions in the chat. And then Andrew will stop every so often and we'll surface some of those questions so that we can do it. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I need to check, Daniel, you're the only one I can see on my screen. Can everyone hear me okay? Please wave or say yes.
I can hear you fine, yes, perfectly.
Perfect. Thank
and
you
Brian's
very much.
waving.
And you can see my slides okay too?
All good.
Perfect. Well, what a build-up. Next time I go for a job interview, I'm going to send you in first to do me that build up. So thanks very much, Daniel. Yeah, my name's Andrew Pepper. Yes, I run a very small management consultancy organization, but also I'm the finance director of Rotherham Hospice Trust, a medium-sized charity. Prior to that, I spent 30 years in the NHS actually, and have seen quite a lot of differences between working in the public sector to working in the third sector. But interestingly, I've seen quite a lot of similarities as well, and I might touch on some of them as I go. Well, thank you for having me here. Sounds like you've had a great morning. Thank you for letting me talk to you today. Well, when the agenda was put together, I was assigned this post-lunch slot, the graveyard slot, and I thought what we probably needed to do was a bit of entertainment. And so I thought, if I can move on. Oh, I'm not moving on. Here we go. Let's try that. There we go. I thought we'd have a game of play your cards right. Now, I'm sure you can all remember how to play your cards right. What you do is you have to work along the pack, deciding whether the next card is higher or lower than the preceding one. There are no polls and no prizes. What do no polls make? No prizes. But feel free to put your higher or lower, your H or L, into the chat box, and we'll see how we go along. You don't need to swap answers at the end either. It's just for fun. So let's dive in with the first question. According to the Charity Register statistics, how many registered charities are there in England and Wales? Clearly, I'm going to give you this answer. I'm going to give you all the answers. You probably know this one, I would think. I guessed it, and I guessed it pretty much on 168,000. Right, off we go. According to the National Lottery Community Fund, how many projects have been funded since 2004? Okay, place your bets, ladies and gentlemen. The wheel is spinning. Is it higher or low? Is it higher or lower? That's probably the worst ever Bruce Forsyth impression you'll hear. And the answer is, I can see them coming up on the chat.
We're getting mainly highers. We're getting mainly highers. A couple of lowers, but mainly higher.
Okay, and the answer is higher. You were right, higher. Higher is the answer. Congratulations, all those who said higher. And we shall move on. According to the Trussell Trust, how many people currently use food banks in London? Okay, are we going higher or lower? And again, I can see them coming through, and the
getting a mixed bag. Getting a mixed bag here.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. Here we go. It's lower. Now, I was quite surprised at that, actually, when I did the research. I thought that probably would have been higher. Having said that, we've been through a terrible time at COVID. It might be higher now. Let's look at the next one. According to the Community Life Survey, how many people aged 65 to 74 often feel lonely? And what's it coming out as, Daniel?
It's higher across the board. Everyone's saying higher, apart from one person says lower.
Okay, well, the answer is it's higher. It's quite a lot higher, isn't it, there? And last but not least, this should be more straightforward. According to the Charity Register, how many charities have a turnover of under £500,000. I've never seen so much chat coming through on anything that I've done. It's fantastic.
Well, judging that the total charities number is lower, I think everyone is going lower.
Of course it is. Yeah, of course it's lower. And the reason I wanted to do that little exercise was just to make sure everyone's mind was back in the room, but actually just to demonstrate a couple of quite important things from my perspective. So one is there's loads of us. And I'm one. I finance director of a medium-sized charity, but I also volunteer as a treasurer in what I would call a very small micro charity in where I live in Wakefield for disadvantaged adults. And so there's loads of us who are out there trying to do stuff for different cohorts, different communities, and different individuals. And that's great, because there's also a great deal of unmet need. I mean, just look at that. Food banks, and as I say, that number is probably going to increase. People feeling lonely, ditto. What a terrible statistic that is, considering the society we live in. And I guess my hypothesis would be, therefore, that there is loads of opportunity for us to work together, loads of opportunity for us to collaborate. If 80 to 85% of all registered charities have a fairly small turnover of £500,000 or less, then actually, imagine the good that we could do if we work together. Now, that is my opening hypothesis for definite. And what I'm going to try and do is take you through a journey to see if you agree with me or not. And I'm going to ask you this question. When did you last collaborate? That's an easy question to ask, not necessarily an easy one to answer, because collaboration probably means different things to different people. Now, what I don't mean by collaboration is picking up the phone for a chat with somebody. That's a connection. That's, for me, not a collaboration. It's great. Connections are part of the journey of collaboration. I tell you what, it's not dialing into a conference call and doing emails at the same time. That's definitely not a collaboration. How many of us have done that over the years? I can't see if you're doing it to me. So I'll just take it on good faith that you're not. Or the other one that I've seen where people say they collaborate a lot of is sending an all user email. It's none of those things. It's something much more tangible. It's joining forces. It's combining with others. It's forming allegiances, bonding together, coming together, working together. It's all those really exciting things. Now, don't get me wrong. Some great things happen by accident. And, a quick Google will tell you those 4 things that I've pulled out there all happened by accident. And I've got some really entertaining stories that sit behind them about how they just happen to come together. But I guess that my hypothesis would be that aren't things better when you collaborate? Aren't the successes better when you collaborate? And here's some non-our sector collaborative successes. The Channel Tunnel, I'm just going to pick these very briefly, but the Channel Tunnel is a great example of leadership through collaboration. Now, never mind your politics. Margaret Thatcher in 1979, after 200 years of people trying to dig holes in Napoleonic times, said, we probably need something that links us with France. And then they started construction in 1988, just in that time frame, which is 9 years. Now, I've built major hospitals and they've taken longer than that. Just in that time frame, they went from a generic idea through all of that process into construction in 1988. And I can remember, I think it was sort of December 90 or something like that. I can remember that moment where they broke through from both sides and they shook hands, sort of the English and the French shook hands. Now, I tell you what, that's not a better example of collaboration. They built it from both ends. Imagine if they hadn't been collaborating. And then it was opened in 1994. It's a real leadership collaborative success, that one. More recently, picking on the Nightingale hospitals, more recently, what date was it? The 24th of March that Boris Johnson locked us down. And he stood up and he said, we're worried about NHS capacity. We're going to need some more capacity and we're going to build all these hospitals. And off he went. On the 3rd of April, the one in the XL was open. Nightingale London was open. That's unbelievable. 2 weeks. Now, how did he do it? Well, I'll tell you how he did it. He collaborated. And what he actually did was this. He said, right, what we need is people with engineering expertise. He got the military in and the military helped to build it. He didn't want to have to build a building. So he used existing buildings like the Excel, or for me, the Harrogate Conference Centre. he looked at the clinical governance, all that legal structure that supports the treatment of patients. And he said, you know what, we haven't got time to put all this in for a new organization. We'll do it under the auspices of one of the biggest hospitals in the country, St. Bart's. And so that all the patients will be ventilated and intubated before they actually get in through the doors of the Nightingale Hospital. So all of that structure collaborated with all those individuals, and he managed to bring that together in 2 weeks. It was a real sort of strategic win, I would say, because he set the objective, he collaborated, and he delivered the output. The Clap for Carers, I guess, was a little bit different because nobody had a strategy for Clap for Carers. And I tell you what, I was out every Thursday night at 8 o'clock in my back garden giving a rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone. My wife said it was the best solo performance she'd ever heard, because actually none of my neighbours joined in. But it just happened organically. It was by communication, wasn't it? And then when Michael Ball got on, yeah, we were away, you know, it all happened nationally. But here's my favourite collaboration story, and it's about Eleanor Rigby. So it all started with Paul McCartney. So Paul McCartney wrote the first verse, but he didn't have the name Eleanor Rigby. He had the name Miss Daisy Hawkins. So you can't even imagine that now, can you? Miss Daisy Hawkins picks up the rice in the church weather. You can't even imagine it. So he took it around to John Lennon's house, and all the Beatles were there in his living room. I don't know what they were doing. I imagine them, I don't know, playing Twister or something. And George Harrison, he played the first verse to them, and George Harrison came up with some more lines to it. You know, look at all the lonely people. Ringo Starr came up with writing the words in the church, in the sermon, that no one will hear that bit. And at the time, Paul McCartney was going out with Jane Asher. And Jane Asher had been listening to the Four Seasons. And she said, you know what, we should do something with a string quartet. So off they went to George Martin. And he said, I'll go one better than that. I'll do you a string octet. He got 4 violins, 2 violas and 2 cellos. And he put them together and he orchestrated it. And then their sound engineer, a guy called Jeff Emmerich, said, you know, we want to make this a bit different. We're going to put all the mics really close to the strings. The orchestra, the musicians complained. They said, you'll be able to hear all the imperfections. And of course you can. So when you listen back to that track, because none of the Beatles actually played on it. When you listen back to that track, it all started in Paul McCartney's living room, and it went through that whole collaborative process, and it ended up with the product that we all know and love. I don't think it would have been the same if Ed Sheeran had done that on his iPad in his bedroom. But yeah, that's just my view. What I've done here is I've listed some of my collaboration credentials. I've done loads of it over the years, and sometimes it works brilliantly, and sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps back. You know, that's just how collaborative life is. And you can see there in that pale blue box some of my examples. You know, how do you get 23 separate health bodies to engage in a single contracting process across the whole of, in my example, Yorkshire and Humber, where you can't tell them what to do? They're independent sovereign bodies. You can't go out there and instruct them, because it doesn't work like that. So you have to go through a collaborative process. So what you do is you engage with them, you communicate, you share ideas, you compromise, you take time, you lead, you drive, you know when to step back, you know when to reach out, you know when to push back. You have leadership and strategy and communication, and you smile a lot, because you want to take people on that collaborative journey and you want them to come with you. Now, not everybody wants to come all the time, but you know, that is just part of the overall process. And I thought I'd apply some of that to what I've seen in the third sector more recently. And I think there's some really fantastic collaborative opportunities. So in this pink box are just some examples. So what I've seen, for instance, I mentioned about the differences between the NHS and the third sector, right? So one of the differences is just scale. So I came from an organisation where my finance department had more than 60 people in it. 60 people in finance departments. It's an unbelievable size. And that was just in one organisation. My finance department in the hospice has got 4 people, and 3 of them are part-time, and I'm the 4th one. And so you don't get any resilience within that. So what if we had collaborative resilience? When my payroll guy goes off sick, which, you know, touch wood, he never does, where do I turn to for payroll expertise? And I think there's some real collaborative opportunities to work together to deal with some of those resilience issues. And all of those examples would be good examples of where I think there's collaborative opportunities. Another example, because of COVID, we have put an absolute stack of resource and effort into digital fundraising. A lot of people have. I don't know if we were behind the curve or on the curve. We certainly weren't in front of it. But we now have a wealth of knowledge about how digital fundraising can work effectively. Now, why do I hold that to myself? Why is that now my specialist area of expertise? Why is it my mastermind subject? Actually, what we should be doing is just collaborating. Now, don't get me wrong, the hospice sector collaborates reasonably well. I collaborate with my peers across the whole region, and that's great. But I tell you what I don't do so well is I don't collaborate so well with other local charities in Rotherham, which is where I'm based. And I could certainly do much more of that. And I could say, look, I've got all this digital expertise. I know that you're trying to reach new groups, new service users. I know that there's an absence of really good bereavement services on my patch. And, if we need something at the moment through COVID, it's bereavement services, sadly. Why don't we work together? Why don't we collaborate on that project? And collaboration has loads of benefits, such as risk management, So the case for me is very much made that by working together, we can probably tick off quite a lot of collaborative issues, really good projects that we perhaps put on the back burner or too scary or our trustees don't want to touch or we don't have the expertise to do or we don't even know where to start. So if I was coming into your organization as a management consultant, I would do this. I'd say, let's take the collaboration health check. And it's dead straightforward. It's not rocket science, is it? Because there's 4 things, there's 4 questions. And those 4 questions are there. You can read them for yourself. But here's the first one, leadership. Do you ever take the time to explore collaboration opportunities? Are you ever brave enough to step out there and have that conversation? So when you're in your network, do you ever step forward and say, you know what? I reckon we could do this together. I reckon we could do this better together. Or perhaps a more scary thought is just to step forward and say, you know what? I don't really know what I'm doing here. Can anyone help? Because that's admitting a weakness, isn't it? Nobody likes to admit a weakness, not least me, frankly. So there's very much something about saying, are we brave enough to step forward and take leadership on collaborating? That's how the Channel Tunnel got started. Somebody had leadership. So I'll give you an example from my history, and I'll give you an example of how I think that works in the third sector. So in my history, I got stopped on the corridor in my office about 2 years ago, and someone said to me, do you think you can save £100 million out of our health system? And I said, that's not really a corridor conversation. How would you like me to go about that? And do you know what? Can I just leave it to you? And I went back and I thought, crikey, how on earth am I going to do that? Do you know how I did it? I collaborated. So what I did was I stepped into the void. There was a void. Nobody was having the conversation. I stepped up and I said, you know what? I think we can probably do this. Let's go on a journey together and see if we can make a difference. Now, fast forward 18 months and it feels quite a long period of time now, but sometimes these projects take a long time. Fast forward 18 months and I built a series of business cases with all the parties around the table agreeing to what those collaborative opportunities were. And even some of those, I don't want to use the word naysayers, that doesn't seem right. Even some of those who are perhaps less well inclined to get involved, they at the end said, you know what, there is something in this for me. It's very much a collaborative opportunity to try and save some of this money. From a blank sheet of paper, I'll talk more about a blank sheet of paper in a minute. Actually, we created something really interesting. And we started with something like 400 or 500 ideas of things we could do. And then we ended up with 4. That says it all. It's about focusing on what's really important. And having just done that, pink list on the previous page of fundraising and resilience and joint staffing and joint projects and risk management and best practice and policy and procedure, that's just so much there. How on earth do you start with some of that? Well, what you do is you pick one, don't you? Or you pick 2 and you say, you know what? I think we should do something together on this. But you have to be brave and you have to step forward and it has to be specific. So there's no point in going to somebody and saying, you know what? I think we should run our retail services together. It scares the horses. And the reason it scares the horses is because everyone immediately starts thinking about jobs and restructures and stuff like that. Actually, what you're better off doing is opening that conversation and saying, you know what, have we thought about opening a cafe that's branded for both of us? Or, you know, on a Saturday afternoon, I really struggle to get volunteers to man my shop. Or, going back to what we said earlier, has anyone got any experience of running eBay stores? So immediately you have a much more specific conversation that sort of takes people along. Let's touch on culture. This is really interesting, isn't it? Because some organizations are pretty hard to reach. Some organizations have it innate, don't they, in their DNA. They want to go out there and collaborate. They want to be seen to collaborate. They just want to do the best. Some are fairly passive, aren't they? They say, you know what, I'll go along with you and we'll see where it goes. And others, as I say, are perhaps a bit more difficult to reach. Which one is yours? Which one is your organization? Are you out there? Are you out there wanting to collaborate? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you making those, setting up those conference calls, leading those conversations, connecting with charities via your local authority hub or your CCG or, you know, whichever area of service you're in? Are you out there doing that? Or are you sat back saying, you know what, I'm happy. I'm happy doing what I do at the moment. You know, I know what I do. I know what I deliver. I know what my USP is. I am happy. Don't touch me. Leave me alone. I guess I would argue if you're one of those organizations, great, because, you know, clearly you know what you're doing. Fantastic. But what could you be missing out on? You know, there's very much a FOMO thing, this fear of missing out. And, you know, I see it myself when you scroll through your own LinkedIn feed and I see stuff coming up all the time from the charity sector. I think, you know, we're not doing that. We should be doing that. We're a drive-through collection point for dropping off donations. We should be doing that, you know, and we weren't doing it. So there's something about having the right culture for collaboration. Strategy. Strategy is the Nightingale hospitals. You know, I'm a great believer in if objectives aren't written down, you'll never deliver them. So if somebody says, you know what we should do this year, what's that? I think we should collaborate. Yeah, me too. Off you go. Oh, hang on a minute, that's just going to get forgotten about. What if we actually wrote it down? So my question to you would be, is it written down somewhere that you're going to collaborate? So have you put it as an objective? Do you talk about it in your appraisal? So if you've got a very small team of 2 or 3 staff delivering care for whoever, do you say to them, you know, one of your objectives this year is to collaborate, is to go out there and see what connections you can make and see what you can do together? You know, take that right up to another level and say, does your board have collaboration on its agenda? Does it feature in your strategy and objectives? So it features in my strategy and objectives that we do collaboration. And I've been running an efficiency process program over the last 6 months in my organization. And what I've done with that is I've taken loads of ideas and I filtered them down and I've gone through an agile process to put some pace behind it, etc. so forth. I'm sure you're used to that sort of approach where it's required. But one of the outputs of that is collaboration. Oh, I tell you what, that's amazing for me because it means I can collaborate once and tick off 2 boxes for the trustees. They think I'm doing something brilliant for the efficiency program and brilliant for the strategy. And do you know what? I am. So there's something about writing it down. It's very important. But the last one is perhaps even more important, which is when do you ever talk about it? So do you talk about it at your board, but do you talk about it in the exec? Yeah, do you know what? I had a phone call from a neighbouring hospice just this week and they were asking me about whether I could share some expertise on facilities. You know, that is the start of collaboration. Do you ever put it on the agenda in your team meetings? I don't know what organisations you come from or how big they are or what resources you have, but I bet you have team meetings. And, you know, on those team meetings, do you ever touch on collaboration? It's a really set of honest questions that you can sort of work through in a really practical way, just to see if you can tick all of those collaboration boxes. I'm just going to pause there very briefly for Daniel to just run through any chat or feedback so far in the chat box.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. So if people do want to ask some questions, do put them in the chat. We didn't say when we were going to do that, so we did. So I invite you to do that right now. I just want to ask one of my own whilst I'm waiting for other ones, if that's all right. You mentioned you went from the NHS with a team of 60 into the third section. You said the difference is scale. And I just want to know how does the scale affect your ability or the way in which you collaborate?
Well, that's a great question, because there's actually a whole range of similarities and differences between the third sector and the public sector. But collaboration. What I've seen in collaboration in the NHS is that it happens on two levels. So it happens on an incredibly formal level and an incredibly informal level. So what you get is, if you say the words collaboration into the NHS, what you tend to get, in my experience, is governance. So, and don't get me wrong, governance has absolutely the right, a place in the right place at the right time. And it's important to drive through extremely large, we're talking £1 billion organizations here, extremely large organizations, to drive through collaboration in a formal and structured way. So governance is really important. So what you get straight into is, we need a board, and that board needs to have minutes, and it needs to have somebody supporting it. It needs some admin, and we'll take the actions away, and each meeting will run through the agenda and do the action points. And so you get a really formal approach to collaboration, and that works. We've done some great stuff in my experience. I've seen some great stuff done. I've seen services change for patients for the better, done in that way. And then you get the informal way. You get loads of local connections, people who know people. It's a sort of place where lots of people know lots of other people. It's a people business, isn't it, the NHS? And so you get loads of those informal connections. Do you think we can work together here? Do you think we can do that? What I'm talking about in the third sector is doing a hybrid of that, because you can't get over-governed with a small set of resources. You do need a little bit of governance. You do need to be able to say, you know what, we'll go on this journey together, and every 3 months we're going to have a meeting to check in to make sure we're making a bit of progress. So you can't dispense with governance altogether. And the most important thing are connections and purpose. So at a smaller scale, and it is a smaller scale, isn't it? Despite what the opportunity might be with 145,000 organizations, it's still happening at a smaller scale. And so what you get is, you can get some very specific projects up and running through collaboration. And what you get, because it's a smaller organization, it's more agile, you're closer to the front, there's fewer layers, all those sorts of things. You can get quite a lot of progress on that done quite quickly, in my experience.
Brilliant. So we've got a few comments here. Marcia has mentioned that she actually does a lot of collaborations to support clients, especially around funding, but she hadn't thought about having the discussion with the board. And I saw that was echoed in something that Brian said. He said that the big issue is often getting the trustees to understand that. So there's an upper level of that. And Danny has asked a question. Do you think that maybe people are worried that if they collaborate, they may lose that power or influence? So we have a kind of a level of collaboration on, let's say, at an operational level, but maybe not a leadership level. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the worst thing I think that you could possibly do is go to a board with a fully formed idea about collaboration. So, to have effectively worked behind the scenes. And this is my point about it being a specialist subject on Mastermind. Actually, the way to collaborate, in my opinion, would be to put it on everybody's desk. And the first desk that I would put it on is the desk of my trustees. I've got a few ideas here. Let's kick them about. That doesn't have to be in a formal meeting. It might just be with your chair, just to get, bounce the ideas off. Or it might be in a workshop session, or it might be just after the meeting while you're having a cup of tea, if those things happen these days in real physical presence. But the idea being effectively that you begin to share the idea, so it's not just sat on your shoulders all the time. And I think the idea about people being worried about collaboration is about being worried about change, isn't it? I will touch on that towards the end of my presentation, sort of the worry about change, because we've all been through such massive change over the last 6 months that I think we've begun to get a little bit more used to what change might look like. At the end of the day, however, you've got people in jobs being paid with mortgages to pay. And that's where people really worry. But I don't think collaboration is about merger. I don't think collaboration is about joint contracts, lead contracts, mergers and partnerships. I think that feels too legal. And I think if you end up down that route, or you set off with that objective in mind, I think you'd probably end up in a different place to the sorts of things that I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting some lovely examples, and even offers to collaborate in the chat. Nick, who's had to leave, unfortunately, has put a request out there if anyone would like to collaborate with the charity in the East Midlands. So we're getting that collaboration happening right now. Rebecca, who's part of my group, she actually gave us a really good update to our group about how she did a lot of stuff last year and during COVID, and she merged last year to have a wholly owned subsidiary. So that gave you opportunities as well. And Marcia, you've come up with a few other questions. Marcia, was there anything specifically you wanted to ask? Do you want to just unmute and ask Andrew directly?
No, it was just a comment about collaborating with institutions like the NHS. Sometimes those governance structures doesn't meet with delivery on the ground. And so there's a disconnect sometimes between the larger institutions and the third sector charities. So, for example, NHS might work with a payment by results model. Well, that doesn't really suit the third sector if you don't have the resources up front to upfront that project. So it was just a comment really about the difficulties in collaborating with more formal or larger institutions.
Is that okay if I just respond to
please
that?
do, yeah.
I think that's an absolutely valid point. And, you know, it's the same if I were to approach, I don't know, Oxfam. Oxfam's turnover is like 400 million quid. And I say to them, can we collaborate? And they say, well, you know, what's in it for me, effectively? You know, what I've found effective in that situation is strength in numbers. So because it is about scale. You know, a small organization trying to deal with a massive organization is just really difficult to get heard. But actually a number of small organizations trying to have a single conversation. So it's about almost getting our narrative together in the first place to say, can we come and talk to you about this? And I actually think what's happening in the NHS at the moment in terms of there's lots of phraseology, but in terms of regionalisation, for want of a better phrase, gives us an opportunity to do that, because what you find then is you're not necessarily dealing with a £100 billion national body. You're dealing with a 2 billion. That's still a huge number. A £2 billion sort of set of local circumstances, and it makes the conversation a bit easier, a bit geographically easier as well.
Right. Thank you. We've got lots of comments, not many questions, but lots of comments, and I think we're getting this idea that at the top. People want structures, they want something formal in place, which you were just saying potentially isn't the best thing. And Nancy had asked a question again that getting at the right level, if you go too high, it can be legalistic and clumsy. What about collaborating with beneficiaries and things like that? Is that something you've come across, collaborating with beneficiaries?
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of different layers of collaboration that we could take this down. Let's go back to the governance point, though. I do think there is some importance to governance. I don't think collaboration needs to be over-governed. I do think there needs to be a structure to it, but it doesn't need to be over-governed, because it'll kill the creativity of it.
Yeah, and then Paul mentioned that lawyers get involved when you get into that bit, and yeah, that can be great. So if anyone got any more questions, keep them coming. We've got another 25 minutes of this. So do you want to continue, or do you want to take some more questions?
I'm going to push on, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
I'm going to do something a little bit more practical, because that feels a little bit theoretical, even though there's some great feedback there. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to introduce you to this blank sheet of paper. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be an author or an artist, because every morning you wake up and you've got a blank sheet of paper. Imagine trying to fill that. At least in my day, I've got a few emails to get me going. And I've developed this concept called the Radial. You'll smile when you see it, because it is what it is. But I'll tell you what it isn't. It's not a project plan, because project plans are really linear. Project plans go from A to B, don't they? And then they get caught up in a load of Gantt charts and timings and weekly reports to feed the beast of meetings. It's definitely not a roadmap from that perspective. And the other thing it's not a mind dump. What do they call them? A mind map, a scattergraph, something like that. Because how many workshop sessions have you been to? I've lost count. Where you put all your ideas onto a giant flip chart and it gets consigned to the flip chart disposal in the sky. This is something really practical. So I started thinking about everything I've said so far along the lines of, if I wanted to collaborate, how would I get into that conversation? What problems do I have, and what am I trying to get out of it? I just tried to problem solve some of the issues myself. And I thought, you know what? First on that list of pink ideas of collaboration was to do something about fundraising. And I wrote fundraising in the bottom left-hand corner. You see my pen is poised. I wrote fundraising in the bottom left-hand corner. I thought, oh, it's too broad. I can't have a conversation with somebody about fundraising. It's not specific enough. It's not going to lead to anything. It's just going to be a nice little conversation and then no output. But if I finesse that down, and I finessed it down to managing the grant system. There's loads of grants out there. We're all familiar with grants, and grant systems very complex. There's lots of research to be done. I think there's some collaboration opportunity about that, but some sharing opportunity. And what do I want out of that? So if my problem is managing the grant system, what do I want out of that? And what I want out of it is increased revenue. Of course I do, you know. So I started off by writing that in the on the page. On the bottom left, I put grants, and on the top right, I put increased revenue. And then I started to think about the stepping stones, not in a linear way, just in an organized set of thoughts. So you can put them down on the set of page in a mind map, random way, but organize them as you go. So you don't end up with just this splurge of stuff in front of you. And I started to populate my Radial. And this is what I did. And my wife was on hand to take some photographs of me whilst I did it. In fact, you'll see on the last photograph that I'm wearing the same shirt and tie as I am today. I'm probably the only person wearing a tie today. And what I started to do was plot out some of those stepping stones. You can't read them. I'll show you how we read it in a moment. But what was quite interesting was as I started to work through this little exercise, I thought, you know what, there are other things that actually spin off this. It's not just about increased revenue. That feels very specific. What if it's about reduced wastage, being more efficient? So I drew another line on, you can see the fourth picture there. I drew another line on another Radial that said, you know, reduced wastage. And then I started to spin off some of the ideas from that as well. And then that started to spin off another objective. So just from one little thing that I think we could collaborate on managing the grant system, all of a sudden I've got 3 major objectives. And I've got the beginnings of a stepping stone process, a Radial, that might get me there. And this is the finished article. Now you might look at that and say, you know, all you've done, Andrew, is write some stuff down. You haven't taught me anything there, and I'll accept that. I'll take that on the chin. But I actually think this is really useful, because imagine getting in a conversation with somebody about it. So I say, you know what I think we should do? Imagine, so let's retract. Let's go back to one of those collaboration meetings. Let's go back to a chief executive's monthly conference call that you dial into, and it's chaired by somebody at a local authority, and you put stuff on the agenda and away you go. And who wants to talk about what? Well, I want to talk about managing the grant system. All right, okay. So you get your slot on the agenda and you say, I think we could work together to do this because of, we can do it more efficiently, reduce wastage, we can get more money, and then we can reduce, we can improve service outcomes. And everyone's, well, there's nothing to argue with about that, is there? Everybody's going to agree with that. Well, that's still not going to get us anywhere. So what do we need to do? Well, you know what? I think we should have a single list of opportunities. That's it. That's all I think we should do, because that feels very, excuse me, that feels very doable. And who should argue about that? So you say, you know what? These are all the grants that I've had access to. This is my grants database over the last 12 months. If I were to put that side by side with your grants database, there'd probably be some overlap there, you know, but they probably wouldn't as well. And so all of a sudden we have a bigger range of opportunities that we can begin to have a talk about. That feels very doable. And once you've got that, then you can take that to the next step. So you can say, well, why don't we update it routinely and share that and take joint responsibility for doing that? Well, again, there's nothing to argue with about that, is there? And you're not saying to somebody, I think we should make a whole suite of joint applications. I'll be the lead and you can join in the back of the application. Because that, whoa, hang on a minute. I've got a grants team who are employed to do this sort of stuff. What does that mean for them? We're not talking about that. We're talking about collaboration. And we're taking people on a journey that people can't argue with. And so let's take the other route. So the other route might be reduced wastage, checklist of best practice. Now, I know when we're applying for grants that they always ask for some stuff. They always ask for a copy of my latest accounts, a statement about how I've managed through COVID, a description of the clinical services I provide. So, you know, we've got that little Bible, happy days. But actually, there's probably a load of other stuff as well that we're regularly asked for. Or maybe if I'm not regularly asked for it, maybe you are. And so you begin to get a sense of a best practice guide of how to do these things. And then you can say, well, I'm applying for this. Why don't I double up my application and we can share the benefits, you know, and all of a sudden you've opened up a massive collaboration opportunity on something that, you tell me if I'm doing this wrong, but actually feels quite resource intensive to try and deliver, and is also quite hit and miss. And I say that not just from my sort of Rotherham Hospice perspective, but also from my treasurer perspective in a small charity. We submit loads of grant applications, you know, National Lottery are renowned for this, and quite often we don't get successful outcomes for reasons that, you know, it might be fair and there's rationing and all that, I get it. But what if we collaborated? Could we not, you know, do that a little bit better together? Now, I've developed that Radial. It's my personal property. That if you use it, you owe me £1 million. Okay. Let's push on.
I just want to mention someone asked a question here. It's for Lindsay about also when you're doing this collaboration, how much do you think you need to align on not just the topic, but also the values, the culture, operating principles when you do that? Or are you going to get onto that?
No, well, I've just flicked onto that's a great question. I've flicked it onto my next slide because that's absolutely right. If you don't align at the top with your values, you're probably on a bit of a hiding to nothing. So you can do all this practical work behind the scenes, but unless you set off with the right narrative, you're probably not going to get to the end point. And so I completely agree to that. I mean, the idea of, I sort of structured this in a way to say to myself, you know, if I was writing a board paper about collaboration, what would I want to include in that? And yeah, absolutely. Number one is about shared values. So if I wanted to collaborate with another hospice on a specific project, I use that as an example. I know we're all in different places, but then the first thing I want to do is make sure we've got aligned values. Now, actually, you know, within the sector, that's probably reasonably straightforward, you know, the best possible care for our patients or whatever. It's probably a lot harder, well, not necessarily a lot harder, it should be fairly straightforward. But the point is that not all organizations want to collaborate. So there's something about, you know, finding the right partner that you want to sort of do business with, for want of a better phrase. So I think that's the most important point up front, to be honest. And once you've got that sort of shared purpose and values, I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, one of my previous examples was, can you just example, can you just write a business case for £50 million worth of investment? Yes, of course I can. Yeah. How did I do that? Well, what we do is we go off, we say, you know, we're not going to be able to do this individually. You know, a number of organizations, we have to work together because individually we're not going to get this across the line. And actually we all need this investment into our premises. Are we all on the same page? Clearly there was a process to get to that very potted narrative, but actually getting that shared purpose and values is absolutely important up front. And then when you start to describe the other aspects of that, the joint benefits, the journey that you might want to take people on, well, we've just talked about that in the Radial, you know, that's that output has formed itself. So you've already begun to get your head around what some of those aspects are, because the blank sheet of paper syndrome means you could have word blindness on it. Then you need some structure. I absolutely think that you do need a little bit of structure. You know, you might want some meetings, some meeting notes, some core attendees, a bit of regularity, a bit of basic governance. It doesn't have to be over governed, but you do need something, because if you don't, it'll just drift into the ether and you'll just be left with a great idea that never went anywhere. So at least you can monitor it and track it and control it. That's really important. And progress and momentum is also really important. You know, one of the chief execs I was working with taught me something great. He said, why would I bother? I get loads of invites to loads of stuff. What makes this any different? You know, so well, I'll tell you what makes it different. I'd work through the narrative. And so you know, once you've got that in your head, you can begin to tell a coherent tale about stuff. But what I've been thinking about more recently is something a little bit more current to that, which is COVID. And I know you've had a session on COVID earlier today, so apologies if I'm going over old ground, but we're quite fortunate where we are, because we've got access to mental health professionals who, you know, deal with bereavement, but also, you know, have supported us through the COVID process. And they talk about a number of phases in COVID, which you might have been through this morning, which is, you know, sort of like an anticipatory phase, an active phase when it's all happening and, you know, is surging to a solution, and then a reflection and recovery phase. And I guess some of these collaboration aspects are part of an active phase. And that's why I say there's a lot of change narrative that sits around this as well. And so you can see here, what they would tell me is, and what they have told me is, you know, to get through, to push through, to surge through the difficulties, those terrible, terrible months, not that long ago when COVID was at its peak and we were all worried about our homes and our families and our work colleagues and our patients and people we look after. Actually, the things that we needed were these, and they're these 6, excuse me, these 6 boxes. We've already talked about leadership and communication, but some additional aspects to that, so physical safety, so in a COVID sense, that's probably, having the right PPE and being able to get a sandwich from Asda when you finish your shift and stuff like that, because they were real issues, weren't they? But there's probably something in there for a collaboration change as well, and that's my point about don't make people scared about, not being able to pay their mortgage. People need to feel physical safety when you're going through collaboration projects. These aren't necessarily about mergers and takeovers and what other phrases we want to use, that feel like legal structures. They are purely collaboration. And I think the human connection is important as well. It goes almost with the reassurance box, because being able to have a conversation about what it's all about, it's not about, management looking good. It's about, in our case, providing the right care for patients, providing better care, improved care, higher quality care, more efficient care for patients. And once you put patients at the heart of that, maybe that goes back to shared purpose and values, then you can begin to construct that relationship with people who might be feeling a little bit more anxious about it, and recognizing that anxiety might exist is really important as well. That if people are anxious about stuff, they'll disengage, or they'll just overly worry about stuff they don't need to worry about. And so there's something about recognizing that. Phrase I use is, it's okay not to be okay. And there's something about, even when you're doing the collaboration yourself, it's okay not to be okay. You push yourself forward, and I mentioned it earlier, 2 steps forward and sometimes 1.5 steps back. There's some real food for thought there. I've got just 1.5 slides to close with, but Daniel, if there's anything that you want me to respond to.
There are a couple of themes coming up. A couple of people are asking about CSR, about your thoughts about charities and the third sector collaborating with businesses under CSR. And the other question that's come up, which is slightly more philosophical, was Nick was asking whether you need to have a specific purpose, or are you advocating just for the practice of collaboration in itself as a good business practice? So whichever one of those you want to take first.
Yeah, I'll take the specific purpose one first, because I think I think collaboration is good practice. I think I think we should be in the business of collaboration for all the reasons that I've described earlier. But I think having that conversation in an unformed way, I think might actually do more damage than it's good. So if you just have the conversation that says, I think we should work together, I think we should collaborate. Yeah, so do I. Actually, I think if you put some specificity around it, using the radial, but whatever technique that suits you best, and you have, well, I think we should do this together, or we could do this together, I think you're likely to get a bit more traction on it. So that would be my approach to it. And my experience of this has told me that. So the idea of having sort of peer meetings is great, because it builds connections. It allows you to have some of those informal conversations and networks that we spoke about, but it doesn't necessarily take agendas forward. But it's all part of the process. My personal view is spend some time thinking about what you want to collaborate on. That's what I do, and then actively going out and dedicating your management time, or some of your management time, to pursuing that objective. And sometimes it works, and just accept sometimes it doesn't work for whatever reason. Sorry, Daniel, what was the first point?
The other point was a question about CSR. It was about using businesses' CSR, maybe have budgets or CSR initiatives as opportunities to collaborate. So big businesses, or just the business sector, working with the third sector.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's loads to go at here, and I think social responsibility is right up there on everybody's agenda at the moment. Now the challenge, I think, is getting into the right organisations, and it's the challenge that Marcia mentioned earlier about small outfits trying to communicate with the larger outfits. And my response being, well, if you do that in a collaborative way, you might get somewhere with it, perhaps. And I think that is a real issue. But I've just connected with the Barclays Digital Eagles team. You'd have seen them on telly, doing some great work. And I want to, when you go to your doctors and you get a video consultation. So I want to be able to do that with all our community nurse specialists delivering palliative care to our patients. It's safer for everybody, it's more effective, it's more efficient, it's quicker, it's more responsive. It's really difficult to achieve for a large number of reasons. And the reason I've connected with the Barclays Digital Eagles is because they're expert at it. So I've got some of their expertise straight away to say, you know what, we know what some of the issues are. And some of the issues are language, some of the issues are digital confidence, and some of the issues are digital poverty. And by digital poverty, I mean people who just don't have the technology. If you don't have an iPad, you're unlikely to have Wi-Fi. You know, I can't even lend you an iPad, it won't work. So, so there's something about making the right connection into the right place. For me, it's about the research. So again, we could go scattergun. I could put on my LinkedIn, who wants to collaborate with me on whatever, and that's great. And I'll probably get some responses, and some of them might lead somewhere. But I'd probably be a bit more successful if I targeted that. That would be my view. Right, my time's nearly up. I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. Here's some more interactivity for us. And I reckon some of these you'll know. Now, this is my version 1 of my closing thoughts slide. It's not actually my final slide, but let's do it anyway. Have we got time? Just. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. On the chat box, again, Daniel, I'm going to ask you to have a look and see if people know. This is quite a famous one. You see this quote. It's I don't know how old it'll be, 15 years. You see this quote on those motivational posters, you know, the ones that feature soaring eagles and high mountain tops. You see them plastered all over office walls. And as I say, it's quite a famous collaborative quote. That's the point about these. These are all collaborative quotes. Have we got anybody offering a suggestion or not?
We've got someone saying Steve Jobs. Marion
Steve Jobs,
saying Steve Jobs.
100 points to you, sir.
Well done, Marion. And her amazing
Very
avatar.
much, 100 points. Right, well, let's whiz through the others. Coming together is a beginning. Staying together is Did you Google that, Marion? Coming together is a beginning. Staying together is progress. And working together is success. This is a really good quote. It's a very old quote, actually. It's probably going away 75 years old or more, this quote. This one is, again, nobody's sure, are they? It's fine.
Henry Ford. I'm gonna go for a guess.
Nice one, yeah. Now,
absolutely,
Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford died at the end of the Second World War. That is still such a relevant quote, I think. So, what about this one? This is it for those of you sporting quotes. In C, talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships. This was pondering. Again, you see this on motivation.
We've got Michael Jordan.
Nice one. Okay, you're doing well. Now, this one's going to be a tricky one.
Was it Michael Jordan?
It was Michael Jordan.
Oh,
yeah.
well done,
Yeah, you put Michael into my search engine, you get Michael Ball. What does that say about me? Great things are done by a series of small things. But this is a tough one. I think this is a toughie, but I think it says it all. This. I don't think you'll get this one. This is Van Gogh said that. I think that's a really interesting one. And then the last one, I think this is a great one. I'm not even sure it's completely true, actually, when I've done it, but I'm not the leader. I'm just the lead singer. Anybody want to hazard a guess? Clearly a band, isn't it? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Anyway, we got Jagger from Judeline.
Nice one.
John Lennon, maybe?
Yeah, close but no cigar. Freddie Mercury.
Freddie Mercury.
And
I've seen the film as well.
It was in Bohemian Rhapsody, but whether he actually said it, who knows? Anyway, I decided not to end on that. I decided to end on something else because I wanted to knit this together. There's so many of us trying to do so much for so many people who need it, and we're all trying to do it independently. But just imagine if we tried to do it together. That's me, Daniel. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And Judeline's also given one, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, which is one I've heard as well. Who said that one, Judeline? Do you know the source of that quote?
I believe it's an African proverb.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. That was very enlightening. I think there was a lot to take out of that because collaboration, as you said, is cultural. It requires leadership. It's a practice people need to put in place. But also, what was clear from there is you need the framework. You need something to focus that collaboration on, so that you can align on all those things. And I love the idea of the Radial, putting it out there so you can actually map it out, show people. There's clearly some challenges from the start about having to get senior people to buy into the collaboration, not wanting to turn it into legalese, wanting to turn it into that. So lots of food for thought. And Nancy's also added that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together is actually the motto for Nancy's team. Nancy, do you want to tell us about your motto?
Oh, it's the motto for the startup that I work for called Thrive Worldwide. And we are huge believers in working together and collaborating as a senior leadership team. And half our team is in Kenya, and our CEO is based in Kenya. She's British, but yeah, and it just expands what you can do. And it seems slower when you go together, but it's actually more productive in the end. Yeah,
absolutely. And I have to say, I've used that as well, because I run a one-man band, and not literally a band, but my business. And I do find the more I collaborate, the more I have a long-term success in health. So Andrew, so much to learn from that. Thank you so much. Do you want to just go on to your last slides? We can just see your contact details. We will share these slides with you afterwards as well. But thank you so much for that, Andrew. It was wonderful. And